Dougal the Demiguise considered himself to be rather good at caretaking, something in which he took pride. He often spent his time wandering about the other habitats of the suitcase in which he lived, happily attending to the other creatures in any way he could. He had hidden shiny things throughout the case to keep the Niffler entertained. He had respectfully watered the trees the bowtruckle so carefully guarded. He had even looked after the alchemy when it had hidden away in that strange building. Yes, Dougal considered himself to be very knowledgeable in taking care of many different kinds of creatures. Even wizards. Well, his wizard, anyway. But tonight, these skills had yet to be used. The day had been a long one, scavenging for food and keeping vigil over the significantly larger alchemy. But then the two of them had been returned home, tucked safely away in the comfortingly familiar grounds of Newt's suitcase. Apparently, several of the other creatures had managed to escape as well, and all the ensuing excitement had left most of the animals tired and cautious. So tonight, wherever the Demiguise wandered, the creatures were either asleep or blatantly disinterested in his presence. The mooncalves with the glowing full moon tonight had not even deigned to spare him a glance. What was a bored Demiguise to do? He didn't want to sleep, that was for sure. So, there was only one option left. In his customary silence and easy grace, the Demiguise sloped into Newt's workshop. Plants, tools, books and vials littered the many shelves, but Dougal passed all of these. He had inspected them before. Instead, he headed to the back of the room, made a quick jump, and then smoothly scaled the ladder until he reached the top of the case. Clinging to the wooden rungs, he raised his silver head to the ceiling and listened for his wizard. There, close by, it was breathing. Quick, shaky breaths through the mouth. Some creatures breathed quickly like this all the time, Dougal knew, but not his wizard. Newt's breaths were slow and even, calm and consistent. They didn't sound like this. Uneasy now, the Demiguise banged once on the top of the suitcase, hoping to get Newt's attention. No response. A swooping feeling filled Dougal's insides, like the sensation he felt when jumping from a great height to the floor, except that this did not feel fun or enjoyable in any way. Gathering his strength, the creature banged against the case again, harder this time, and was met with a rewarding click. One of the latches had snapped open. Dougal, is that you? There was a slight strain to the voice, but it was nonetheless his wizard's voice. A blessed cool ran through the Demiguise's veins, like the caress of windswept snow on a mountaintop. Dougal bumped against the case in response. A shaky sigh, a rustle of fabric, the dull click of the other latch, and then the lid was lifted, and Dougal was met with a gentle but restraining hand. His wizard was regarding him carefully, arm outstretched over a tangle of soft and inviting blankets. You have to be very well behaved if I'm to let you out. No running off. Newt's voice was firm, and there was a trace of the same strain Dougal had heard earlier, and yet the Demiguise could still hear the undercurrent of Newt's invariable kindness. Dougal stared up at his wizard, eyes wide and body still to show his obedience, until Newt nodded and pulled his hand back, granting his permission. As Newt drew his hand back, Dougal noticed that it was shaking, almost imperceptibly. This, too, was not his wizard's normal behavior. His hands were steady, deft, experienced. Climbing the rest of the way out of the case, Dougal turned and closed it behind him, locking both latches the way Newt had taught him. As he was doing this, the sounds of rustling fabric and the creaking of weight being redistributed told him that Newt was returning to his former position. Having finished locking the case, the Demiguise looked around to find that Newt's position was unnatural too. In fact, the more Dougal studied him, the more his appearance screamed that something was definitely not right. The wizard was sitting with his back against the headboard of the bed, knees drawn up to his chest. His eyes were closed, but his face was pallid. and Dougal could see beads of sweat that shone on his forehead and darkened the mess of hair that threatened to fall in his eyes. His hands on either side of him were clenched around fistfuls of blanket. Newt's breathing was slower now, Dougal noted, closer to normal, but still different, like it was forced. The demiguise turned his detailed stare to the room around them. It was time, yet again, to scavenge. Hopping noiselessly onto the bedside table, Dougal wrapped his long fingers around a promising glass and peered inside. Water. Perfect. Dougal moved back onto the bed, taking the glass with him, and sat down directly in front of Newt, whose eyes were still closed. The demiguise placed a hand lightly on one of his wizard's knees. Immediately Newt flinched, eyes flying open. This close, the demiguise could hear his heartbeat increase suddenly and drastically. But then Newt's light eyes focused on the creature before him, and his heartbeat slowed to a more normal rate. "Sorry, Dougal," he apologized quietly, with a small smile. "You startled me." The demiguise held out the cup of water expectantly. "Oh, I see. Thank you," Newt replied, taking the cup. A real smile crossed his face this time, and he drank the remaining water under Dougal's watchful gaze. When he had finished, he handed the empty glass back to the demiguise with a knowing look, and laughed lightly as Dougal happily set it back on the bedside table, and then returned to sit in front of him again. The demiguise contemplated his wizard, pleased with the changes so far. Newt's posture was now much more relaxed, closer to the quiet calm he usually exuded. He was no longer curled in on himself, but sat with his legs crisscrossed, hands unclenched and resting easy in his lap. It was good progress. But, Dougal noted, Newt was still pale and marginally shivery. So the demiguise crawled forward until he was sitting in Newt's lap, and reached his long arms up to rest on the wizard's shoulders. He fixed his intense stare upon Newt's face, looking questioningly up into his eyes. The wizard flushed at the attention, and ran a hand affectionately through Dougal's silky fur. "I'm all right," he explained softly. "Just had a bad dream is all." Dougal clambered back out of Newt's lap and stood up on the bed. He knew exactly what to do. He reached out, took one of Newt's hands in his own, and tugged, turning pointedly towards the suitcase. "You want to go back in now?" the wizard asked kindly, moving towards the case. He undid the latches and lifted the lid in one fluid movement. "Go ahead," he encouraged when Dougal did not go in. Undaunted, the demiguise walked around behind his wizard instead and pushed him gently towards the suitcase. "You want me to come with you?" Newt wondered. Pleased, Dougal grabbed the jumble of blankets in one hand and the edge of Newt's coat in the other and climbed into the case. He let the blankets drop to the floor and then looked back up at his wizard. Newt was looking uncertain, and he glanced at the bedroom door thoughtfully. But Dougal grabbed his hand again, tugged him empathically towards the case, and Newt gave in. "Oh, very well," he relented, and with a quiet rustling, a small thump, and 2 sharp clicks, they were inside.
The rich, heavy scent of freshly brewed coffee filled the apartment, accompanied by the quiet crackling of eggs being cooked, and Queenie's soft, tuneless humming. Tina smiled. It was nice to see her sister in such a pleasant mood this morning. The night's sleep and the promise of a hearty breakfast must have done her some good. Indeed, the sleep had helped Tina herself. She hoped the night had been kind to Newt as well. Approaching his door, she cleared her throat and knocked loudly. "Newt?" she called. No sound greeted her in response, so she turned the doorknob and swung the door open slowly and quietly. What was the best way to wake him? Was he a heavy sleeper? Should she touch his shoulder, or would that startle him? Stepping quietly into the room, every thought of the best way to wake a magizoologist vanished from her mind. The bed was empty. The room was empty, except for his case. Tina frowned. If she knew anything about Newt, it was that he would never go anywhere without his case. Not willingly, her brain supplied. Visions of a crazed Grindelwald breaking out of Makusa and vowing revenge on the wizard who had captured him stole her breath for a moment. but she shook her head, chasing the irrational thoughts from her mind. She was an aura, after all. Or at least she had been. One cursory glance around the room told her all she needed to know. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry. The only things missing beside Newt himself were the blankets Queenie had brought him last night. Evidently, he had elected to sleep in his case. Having determined that, Tina crossed the room and approached the case confidently. 3 quick knocks. "Newt?" she called again, unsure whether or not he would be able to hear her. Again there was no response, and so she undid both latches and lifted the lid. She would just go in and get him. Descending carefully, Tina found herself in Newt's strangely cozy and inviting workshop for the second time. She glanced around with interest at the books, plants, vials of mysterious liquids and stray sketches that took up nearly every inch of shelving, desk space and wall space. She smiled to herself. The room was so very him. Continuing forward cautiously, she stopped as a strange sight greeted her eyes. There on the floor, not too far away, was a pile of magical creatures. Sleeping magical creatures. Peering at them, she noticed the edge of a blanket peeking out from beneath the furry, scaly and feathered mass. It was one of hers. Perhaps Newt had laid a blanket down for them. How curious. She hadn't imagined all those species to sleep so close together, piled on top of one another and looking oddly at peace. Wouldn't it make more sense for them to sleep in their respective habitats? Brow crinkled in confusion, Tina stepped silently forward, inching toward the living, breathing mass. Closer now, she could recognize the mischievous Niffler, the secretive demiguise, 2 thankfully small okamis, and a half-hidden sliver of bright green that she assumed to be a bowtruckle. Most of the creatures she couldn't even guess at. Bewildered, she continued to creep forward, intending to sneak around the bizarre group and find Newt. But another glance stopped her short in surprise. Was that a human hand? Slowly, her eyes readjusted to the sight, like finding that one overlooked word in a word search puzzle. Newt, she breathed finally. For there he was, in the midst of all the creatures. His eyes were closed, expression smooth and peaceful in a sleep as deep as that of the animals around him. The demiguise, Dougal, she remembered, was curled comfortably atop Newt's chest and rose and fell in time with the wizard's slow, even breaths. A pleasant warmth spread through Tina's body at the sight, and she grinned, wanting more than anything to be able to capture this moment just as it was. She had only begun to understand the depth of Newt's love and care for his magical creatures, but never had she considered their love for him. It was endearing, beautiful, magical. She would loathe to ruin the moment, but Queenie had likely finished making breakfast, and the day would not wait for them, no matter how much she wished it. So, feeling distinctly disappointed, she cleared her throat and spoke up. "Newt," she said, vainly attempting to find a volume that would wake Newt without startling the animals. But most of the creatures got up immediately at the sound of her voice, several of the smaller ones even scurrying off through the door, presumably to their own habitats. All the movement woke Newt, who blinked blearily and raised himself up slightly, dislodging a few animals and earning disapproving squeaks and grunts. "What's wrong?" he asked quietly, seemingly addressing his creatures, and he met eyes with Dougal still clinging to his chest. The demiguise turned to watch Tina with his wide, innocent eyes. She smiled at him. "Hi, Dougal," he said kindly with a small wave. "Tina!" Newt exclaimed, scrambling to his feet and offending several more of his creatures. "Good gracious, what time is it? Have I slept late?" "No, not at all," Tina placated quickly, feeling guilty for startling him and upsetting his animals. "Oh, good." Newt breathed, visibly relaxing. The demiguise had wrapped his arms around Newt's neck and was hanging there calmly and patiently. Newt brought his arms up to hold him, and Dougal shifted into a more comfortable position. The magizoologist smiled at Tina, seeming to glow, and then knelt down to address the remaining creatures assembled at his feet. "Good morning, everyone," Tina heard him say softly. "Thank you, very much," he told them, offering affectionate pats and well-appreciated scratches. One by one, they turned and left, until only Dougal remained. Newt straightened up and walked over to Tina, the demiguise still in his arms. "Do you remember Tina, Dougal?" he asked the creature, who looked again at the witch in question. Tina fancied she saw a flash of recognition in the animal's eyes. "Tina helped me get you home safe," Newt reminded him. "I couldn't have done it without her." The fondness in his tone was unmistakable, and Tina shifted her gaze from Dougal to Newt. The magizoologist was watching her, a wide grin lighting up his eyes. The ex-Aura smiled back, feeling blood rushing to her cheeks. Here was another moment Tina wished would last forever. Happy, warm, calm, just enjoying the company. But then Dougal reached up and tugged on Newt's shirt, and the magizoologist looked down, breaking their eye contact. The demiguise gestured at the floor. "Do you want to go now?" Newt asked, kneeling again and depositing the creature on the floor. But before Dougal could run off, the wizard reached out and ran a hand through the silvery fur atop the demiguise's head. "Thank you," he said quietly, low voice steeped in gratitude. "You really helped me out, Dougal." The demiguise leaned in and held onto Newt for a moment before pulling back, his large eyes raised upward to study Tina again. And then he sloped off, movements easy and well coordinated. Newt stood, and together he and Tina watched the creature disappear. "Queenie made breakfast," Tina informed him. "We thought you'd like to eat with us." "Of course," Newt replied without hesitation. "Thank you."
Food was a comfort, Newt agreed. One of many.